think we're now quarter past. I don't know who's here. Mr. Allen, are you here?
I am, sir.
Good. And I presume, Robert, you're here for the council?
Yep, we're all logged in.
Good. Okay. Yeah, let's kick off. Thank you for making time to for us, Mr. Hood. I think in particular, Commissioner Dimmery had some questions for you in relation to Northport, I think, wasn't it? Is that correct? No.
That's correct, thank you.
Yes, I thought I got it right. Yeah, thank you.
Could I just check if Mr. Blomfield from
Mr.
Northport is here? I can't see him, but he was going to attend and answer questions as well.
Oh.
Is he showing up on at your end?
The difficulty is I can only see a list of some names and it says +8.
Yeah,
So,
I've got +11, but anyway.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how I see who the +8 are.
Okay. Greg, are you one of the +11?
No, he's not.
I've just re-forwarded him the invite in case he didn't have it.
Okay.
We'll wait a second then and make sure we know what's happening.
Commissioners, I see that Mr. Chilton has just joined. I wonder if while we wait for Mr. Blomfield, perhaps we can run through his evidence.
I don't know how long Mr. Hood's got because he was an add-in. How long do you have, Mr. Hood, rather than us jump in front of you now you're here?
Well, I nothing pressing. I can stay on if you need me to.
Oh, yeah. No, I think you're Mr.
He's here.
Blomfield's here. Yeah, so we carry on with that if that's okay, Ms. Ellis.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Blomfield, for coming along too. Commissioner Dimmery in particular just had some questions that she would like to ask, which is why we've asked if you can come along. So I'll pass to Commissioner Dimmery. Thank you.
Thank you. My questions, good afternoon. Just a couple of questions to assist us. We've had a lot of discussion during the hearing about the impact of the Marsden line going past the site. And I'm aware in your submission you pointed to the Port's Vision for Growth website and progress there for the port expansion. And it did say that traffic modelling was being done. So my questions are, have you completed that modelling, and is there any more information on potential road movements and any prediction or thought about potential split that you might remove from road and transfer to rail, or is it too premature to understand that at this point?
Yes, we've just received the traffic impact assessment report from WSP on that, and as far as the split goes, it's probably not something I can easily pull out of that at short notice. But I did have a quick look at the report prior to coming in and getting some takeaways from it. If that's helpful. However, when it comes to the road and rail, there is obviously a lot of prediction around this, and it's difficult to say exactly the volume. It's sort of dependent on where that cargo is moving to. Our forecast and scenarios is a lot of that cargo will be heading down to a distribution centre down in Auckland, possibly in South Auckland, which would favour rail. If that were were not to take place, then it would probably be more on the North Shore, which may be a bit more of a split between road and rail, just because of the proximity.
Thank you. And in terms of this might be premature again, that when the rail, when it is built, is there any thought to what size of wagon you can accommodate within the port? Because one of the matters mentioned in the acoustic assessment, and I think it was Mr. Stiles, was referred to the length of the wagons will determine the length of time. There's a noise intrusion, so if they're very long, it would be longer, and if they were shorter, it would be a short, sharp noise effect. And I don't know if it's far too early to know this with any certainty, but presumably within your planning for the port, some thought's been given to what size of rail wagons you can accommodate.
Yeah, it possibly a little bit premature and a little bit dependent on the actual rail network and how the Kiwi Rail operators operate that network. So the port will always have a spur of rail coming into the port of limited length, with a shunting yard located outside the port, and so that would provide the Kiwi Rail operator to bring a number of wagons into the port, but that would not make up the full length of the train. That would then, they'll be shuttled in and then back out to the yard outside the port, and then they'll be combined and made into the full rail length, full wagon length. And a bit of that is dependent on how long it would take to get that train into Auckland, let's say. And so they'll obviously want to try and maximise as many wagons as possible in order to get it down in one hit, rather than doing multiple runs down of smaller combinations.
Okay, so
I was just going to say, so similar issue then on that basis was the trains leaving entirely out of your control. So all you're doing is you'll have a contract with Kiwi Rail to move it, and there'll be a set timescale of some sort, but more than that, you don't have any control over.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be demand based, isn't it? So that the amount of containers or cargo that needs to head between Northport and Auckland will sort of determine the amount of wagons travelling, and also the number of different trains. So it may be just that it's a daily occurrence. So one running, let's say at night time, gets away from the commuter aspects that's using the rail in the daytime in Auckland. So it's probably going to be focused around a nighttime shuttle down to Auckland. And of course, if the number of rail movements are probably going to be higher associated with a ship that's just come in or it's been in recently. And if it's sort of more further down the track, that'll be more regular and bigger trains.
Sorry, Commissioner Dimmery, back with you.
Those are all my questions. Thank you, and appreciate you making the time to speak to us. It was just to assist our understanding of the potential nature of movements, because we did hear from Kiwi Rail this morning in quite a lot of detail, and I was interested in the port's predictions and need, given that the line goes to the port. So thank you.
So out of interest, what proportion are you looking at in terms of a ratio road to rail in time?
Yeah, I don't have that ratio road to rail.
No.
It's jumping out at me at least.
No.
Some of the figures I did get around our current use versus future use, I don't know if that's of assistance.
Okay.
The Port Marsden Highway or the state highway there.
Yeah, that would be useful. Thank you.
So with the port's future, well, currently the port's seeing in its study that the Port Marsden Highway route is transporting 4,363 vehicles a day on average, which comes from a survey from October through to December in 2019. And 20% of that is heavy vehicles. For the future, the port traffic is looking to take about 33% of the use of Port Marsden Highway, and our predicted time there is at 2033. That would be 3,860 vehicle movements of 11,514 in total. And through to the predictions in 2040 would see 29% of the traffic flow being port related heavy vehicles, which is 4,178, which comes from a total state highway use of 14,236.
Thank you. No, that's it for me. So Commissioner Dimmery, you have nothing. You've just confirmed you have nothing else yet. Good. Okay, fantastic. That was helpful. Good. No, thank you for making the time for us.
Not a problem.
Good. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. So we're back to Ms. Ellis, I think, and her.
Yes, so now we've got Mr. Chilton.
Yeah, fine. Yeah, I've got Mr. Chilton's evidence in chief. Do we have anything else, or we don't have anything else circulated, do we?
No, there hasn't been anything further. It's
No,
just
that's
the
all right.
evidence in chief from back in August. So as with Mr. Elliott and Mr. Macefield, I'll just ask Mr. Chilton to read through his executive summary and then take your questions.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis. Thank you, Commissioners. So just starting at paragraph 13 on my evidence, private plan change 156 to create a town centre in the Ruakaka and Marsden Point area at the Marsden City site development site. It proposes a shift away from industrial focus at this site with significant intensification of residential and commercial activities that will be sensitive to industrial odours, including those from the refinery at Marsden Point. The development is approximately 3.5 kilometres west of the refinery at the closest point, and I note that there are a number of other residential areas, including One Tree Point, Ruakaka and Whangarei Heads, which are located within similar or shorter distances from the refinery. I've considered the potential for reverse sensitivity effects in relation to air discharges from the refinery as a result of the PC 150 development. In this regard, I consider the key air discharge from the refinery that may impact on the PC 150 site are odours. Odours from the refinery have resulted in complaints from residential areas located at a similar distance from the refinery to that of the PC 150 site. I consider the extensive nature of the proposed development with an increased focus on high sensitivity development, increased provision for residential and commercial land and less industrial land will result in an appreciably greater risk of odour complaints and therefore an increased vulnerability of the refining New Zealand to reverse sensitivity odour effects. Also of importance is the relatively high frequency of winds from, and this should read east to northeast, that would carry any odour emissions from the refinery towards the PC 150 area. Just noting that that same correction should be made at paragraph 48 of my evidence in chief. With regard to the section 42A report, there does not appear to be any detailed consideration of reverse sensitivity effects other than in relation to acoustic related effects. Furthermore, the various objectives and policies for the different land use zones associated with the PC 150 only seek to manage rather than avoid reverse sensitivity effects. And I consider that the relief proposed by Mr. Macefield largely addresses this concern and should be adopted. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Dimmery, do you have any questions?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chilton.
Hello.
We heard from Mr. Elliott this morning about the refinery becoming a terminal and other options being looked at for potentially sustainable aviation fuels and hydrogen. And I, whilst I appreciate that this is still being investigated and nothing set in stone, do you have any experience or any understanding of international guidance about these types of activities and potential odour effects associated with these activities?
I guess I'd probably start, I'm not familiar with any necessary international guidance, but in terms of the type of activities, I think Mr. Elliott, when I heard this morning, was sort of indicating, for instance, with the sustainable aviation fuel side of things, that would use much of the same infrastructure as currently in place, which indicates to me that much of the same processes would be operating, further indicating that much of the same sources of odour would be present. And so there may not be any appreciable or significant change from what's there currently.
And it may be too soon to know, but would these need a new air discharge consent, or would you anticipate it might be covered by the existing?
I'm anticipating it'd probably be covered by the existing activity in terms of the rules that would trigger the need for a consent. It's probably unchanged, and in terms of the type and nature of air discharges, they're probably quite comparable to what's there currently. There may be some benefits, if anything.
Thank you. Turning to the suggestion we heard from Mr. Elliott and also Mr. Macefield about looking at covenants, which is something you've picked up in your conclusion. Have you had any involvement potentially with other types of activities that generate odour and rules or plan provisions that have required no complaints covenants?
So I have had experience with no complaints covenants. I've mostly with regards to the likes of landfills and chicken farms, where I've come across them being used in my own experience before. I'm not necessarily aware of rules specifically requiring covenants to be in place, but that doesn't mean to say there isn't. I'm usually looking at rules from a trigger for an air discharge permit as to a land use sort of side of things. But I am aware of them being used. I think, as was discussed this morning, they're more in terms of their enforcement, it's more of a civil matter rather than one directly for a regional authority to be, upholding. But they do provide a tool or a mechanism to reduce the likelihood of complaints being made to a regional council that would then involve a regional council needing to investigate and take enforcement action if necessary, triggering a reverse sensitivity effect for the activity. And so in that regard, having worked for several years as an enforcement officer in Auckland and dealing with that sort of situation, I'm aware of them practically helping to reduce the likelihood of complaints going through to a regional council where it has an obligation to investigate those complaints.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. One of the things, the correction you've pointed to us at the predominant wind direction being easterly and northeasterly. It did seem a little bit surprising in your map that Ruakaka is a long established residential area, yet there was one complaint there, and the majority of complaints actually were in the north, which isn't the direction of the prevailing wind. So do you have any comment on that?
So Ruakaka is, I'm just trying to get my bearings, it's one down to the south, I think, one complaint down to the south. So I think where I talk about frequent rather than prevailing winds, so the wind rose at figure 2 in my evidence in the chief, if you have that. pretty much shows winds coming from
Yes.
most directions, to be fair, at quite a high frequency. The only winds that you don't tend to get are winds from the south, being particularly infrequent. So you've got northerlies, westerlies and easterlies all being relatively frequent. I guess Ruakaka is a bit of a function of distance as well, but there are many factors that can influence why people may or may not complain. But I guess the key point there is the range of distances we're getting complaints from, typically representing where residential areas are.
Could I ask a question about two?
Sorry.
Is that okay? Just to be clear, you haven't marked the site on figure 2, but if I zoom in, is it the plan change area is literally at the end of the longest part on the southwest?
That's correct. Yeah,
you can see it a slightly different colour in there.
It does. It shows up on an aerial photograph. You're quite right. It does sort of have that distinctive shape to it.
And just to make sure that I'm reading the windrows correctly, is the length is showing the frequency of wind from that direction or to that direction?
From. You're right. It's the frequency of the length is proportional to the frequency, and each petal is showing the direction the wind is coming from. So you're looking at the bars extending up to the northeast, I guess, is showing the wind's coming from the northeast.
Yeah, so yes. So what you're saying is we have wind that's coming. So if we take a direct line through the centre of your circle to the site, as it were, and see how big the bars are on the opposite side to the site.
Correct.
That shows us the frequency of wind from those directions. Okay. Yes, and the shading is to do with wind speed.
That's correct. Yes. So we're typically seeing stronger winds coming from that direction, but still a very high frequency of winds.
And the stronger winds will carry the odour further, or they make no difference?
They can make a difference. They can disperse odours more effectively. Typically for ground level releases of odour, the calm winds are more interest. For sources which are elevated, it's actually the stronger winds that are more important. So just depends on the nature of how the odour has been released.
Okay. Sorry, that's it for me. That was my one question, actually, or my one series of questions. Commissioner Dimmery, back to you if you have any further questions.
I was just wanting to understand that better. So the windrows, the least frequent wind is, as you said, coming from the south. Yet there seem to be more complaints in Riotahi to the north, and in spite of the fact that there's less frequent wind coming from the south. And I'm wondering, is there another reason other than wind? Is it because people can see the refinery, so they think? I mean, I'm speculating, but or am I misinterpreting the windrows?
No, look, there are still relatively frequent winds from the acute angle that go towards Riotahi. So you've got the southwest winds will still carry winds from the site, bearing in mind that the site's not just one point, it covers quite a large area. So under those more acute southwest winds, which are still relatively frequent, those will still carry towards Riotahi. Okay. It's the true southerlies where the winds are relatively infrequent, but because the site, like if you look at my figure 3, you can kind of get an appreciation for the relative size of the site, and there'll be a range of activities throughout that site. And then going towards Riotahi, there will still be southwesterly winds that can carry across the site towards there.
Sure. Okay. No, thank you. That's helped. I don't have anything further. Thank you.
Thank you.
Miss Ellis, that's your case?
Correct, that all done.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Thank you.
That was very helpful, and thank you for bearing with us whilst we sorted out the Northport questions first.
No problem at all. Thank
Great,
you.
thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chilton.
Thank you.
Okay, so just returning to my schedule. So Miss Hicks is next, I think. Is she with you, Robert?
Yeah, bear with us 1 minute while we get the computer set up.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Thank you. I'll just open up Miss Hicks' notes.
Can you hear us okay and see Margaret?
We can, yes, thank you.
Sometimes I can hear it and sometimes I can't.
Okay, we can hear you nice and clear, so that's perhaps the important thing initially anyway. So thank you for coming along, Mrs. Hicks. So we're in your hands. We have your we've read your original submission. You can hear me okay?
Yes, and have you had my evidence?
Yeah, we've read your submission. We have your
You should
evidence.
have had that as well.
Yeah, so I would just wonder whether you could take us through the sort of most important points of that, please. Thank you.
Okay, well, I would like you to note that my entire submission is missing from the printed version of attachment 1, Marsden City Proposed Structure Plan, Economic Peer Review. This document included a list of all the submissions, save mine. Unless, of course, you've been given an amended one and actually have my submission included, but it wasn't initially even included. Moreover,
I've seen your original submission, I'm sure.
You have. Well, I'm telling you, it wasn't even
Likewise.
the printed submissions. It was left out.
Okay.
Moreover, in response to these submissions made by B&A Urban Environment, represented by Dave Badham in attachment 5, response to submissions, there's no response to section C of my submission, unless, of course, again, you have got it. I'm saying that one refers to flooding issues. Ironically, it's these issues exacerbated by climate change that are the very ones I've provided evidence for. Despite the vulnerable coastal site of the proposed Marsden development and its proximity to the tidal reaches of the Ruakaka River and one of its tributaries, the Tauranga stream, I appear to be the only submitter to introduce the issue of climate change. And this is particularly significant, given that only on the week commencing the 9th of August, that's the week just past, the Physical Science Basis Report was released by the IPCC, that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, prior to next year's 6th assessment. Please, I ask you, don't make the mistake of thinking that because my submission is handwritten and that obviously I do not own a computer, that I am ill-informed. Quite the contrary. I first became aware of climate change back in 1979 when sailing in the Atlantic Ocean, and I've been studying it ever since. I must admit,
I just, sorry,
change.
Mrs. Hicks, I don't want to interrupt, but I've just received another email that's actually got the document you're reading from, and I hadn't realised there was another one. I just wanted to check that Commissioner Dimmery also had received that, because it's nice to follow on and read what you're saying as well as listening to you, if that's okay. It sinks in a bit more. So Commissioner Dimmery, have you also just received an email with Mrs. Hicks' further written notes?
I have, now that you've pointed me to it. Thank you.
Yeah, it's just come in. Sorry, Mrs. Hicks, to interrupt, but it's very useful for us to have the notes in front of us, and we have them now. So if you would like to continue, so you're in the middle of the last paragraph on the first page, aren't you?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Oh dear, now. Yes, here I am. Well, anyway, when I attended university, which was rather a long time ago, believe it or not, climate change was a historical event. But of course, it isn't that anymore. We're actually having it, whether we like it or not. I have sailed the world in the merchant service and as a single-handed yachtswoman. And since coming to live in New Zealand, I have been recording and photographing the Bream Bay area together with the eastern section of Whangarei Harbour for the past 20 years. I would point out that there's no substitute for ongoing on-site observation. In fact, I was involved in negotiations with North Holdings Group, the original developer of Marsden City. Unfortunately, in recent years, up to 2020, my home has been raided and a vast quantity of photographic evidence stolen, together with many files containing reports, research submissions, etc. This appears to have been in response to the evidence I have submitted, especially that outlining environmental issues and willful damage. I regret to say, you need to know that Ruakaka in particular is notorious for its environmental vandalism inflicted on its dunes, its river, its reserves, and wildlife refuge. There are a number of reasons that other submitters will doubtless raise as to the inappropriateness of this proposed Marsden redevelopment. The fact that the site has stood virtually empty for the past 10 years speaks volumes. However, it is the threat of flooding, the result of sea level rise and extreme precipitation events, some of the predicted outcomes of climate change, that I wish to bring to your attention and have provided evidence. It is my contention that because of the ongoing threat of rising sea level, the result of global warming, there is little point in developing the site of Marsden City, as it will become increasingly isolated by flooding of its approach roads from the main body of Northland, and therefore the entire country. At this point, I need you to look at maps A and B provided in the evidence, and you will see One Tree Point Road, which provides entry to Marsden City, leads north to One Tree Point and the Whangarei Harbour. Southward, it converges with Port Marsden Highway, which runs north to Marsden Point, the oil refinery in Northport. Now, neither of these two roads provide access to State Highway 1. However, access to the State Highway 1 is provided south by the Port Marsden Highway and east and then south via McCarthy Road and Marsden Point Road. But remember, both these routes have already been blocked at least twice from 2002 by floodwater from the Ruakaka River and Taurua Stream. Moreover, flooding is predicted to increase as a result of rising sea level and extreme precipitation events, the effects of global warming. This situation is emphasised in the latest IPCC report. And remember, the Ruakaka River is tidal in this locality. Back in 2010, the Ruakaka River Management Plan predicted flooding in these locations as a result of climate change. And I would refer you to the maps 3 and 4 provided with the evidence. None, however, earlier this year, the Northern Regional Council published the latest flood hazard maps, and I have included 2 numbers 1 and 2, for the relevant areas of Port Marsden Highway and McCarthy Road, indicating 10, 50 and 100-year flood intervals. As one can see, the 10-year flood interval is very extensive and has been illustrated by the enclosed photographs, although many of them, unfortunately, have been stolen. These maps have been produced from evidence recorded over recent years, and to my knowledge, there has been flooding affecting the roads mentioned here in 2001, 2007, 2011, 2020, and on another occasion after 2011, the record of which was stolen. These don't, of course, include minor floods. I live on the banks of the Ruakaka River, so I absolutely see it every single day of my life. So I really do know what's happening there. Presently, sea level rise has resulted from thermal expansion, receding glaciers, and now even potentially more significant, the melting of the polar ice sheets of Greenland and Antarctica. It is the latter two which are expected to adversely affect much of planet Earth's coastal regions, although of course not uniformly because of variations in land stability. Nevertheless, because of ongoing melting of land ice in the polar regions, we can expect sea level to rise more than at present in Bream Bay and Whangarei Harbour, thus posing a threat to the proposed Marsden development. It is when this is likely to happen that is the question, not if. In order to give this hearing an idea of the progress of polar ice sheet melting, I will outline recent events in Greenland and Antarctica. Since 1990, temperatures on the Greenland ice sheet have risen by almost 3 degrees Celsius. Ice loss from the island has increased 7-fold from 30 billion tonnes a year to an average of more than 250 billion tonnes a year. During an exceptionally warm couple of days in the summer of 2019, melting was detected on more than 95% of the ice sheet surface. According to scientific reports that summer, Greenland showed almost 600 billion tonnes of ice, producing enough water to fill a pool the size of California to a depth of 4 feet. According to Elizabeth Colbert, author of Under the White Sky, The Nature of the Future. Elizabeth Colbert, you know, is a very well-known scientific author. She has actually had the Pulitzer Prize for her work on the sixth extinction. Just think of all this water entering the ocean circulation. It will only be a matter of time before at least some of it reaches New Zealand. A similar situation is developing nearer to home in Antarctica. Here, the Antarctic Peninsula has been warming for some time. In fact, it was reported in the National Geographic back in 2017 that it had warmed 9 degrees Fahrenheit since 1950. Here, the Larsen ice shelves, A and B, have disintegrated in 1995 and 2002. More recently, however, this year in February, a huge area of ice broke free from the Brunt Island ice shelf in the Weddell Sea, followed by an even larger area of sea ice, twice the size of Stewart Island, from the Ron ice shelf in May. Now, although these giant bows are composed of sea ice and would not therefore raise sea level upon melting, they have released pressure on the land ice, which can now more easily flow into the Antarctic Ocean. Likewise, glaciers such as Pine Island and Thwaites have been steadily flowing into the Amundsen Sea. There is no doubt that West Antarctica is warming. However, East Antarctica, which has previously been thought to be stable, is now showing signs of instability around the Totten Glacier. It can only be a matter of time before these ice sheets, together with Greenland, affect sea level worldwide, and that includes New Zealand. Of course, the rise in sea level will not be uniform. Not only will it be modified by the raising and subsidence of land, but local meteorological conditions will increase it, such as low pressure, storm surges, and extreme precipitation events. In the case of the Ruakaka River, as with other tidal estuaries, much will depend upon the state of the tide. Obviously, when such conditions coincide with a high spring tide, there is every possibility, even now, that flooding will periodically occur. However, with the progress of climate change, this is predicted to be more frequent. The only question is when. Nevertheless, this latest report, released by the IPCC in August, is the strongest warning given to date. It gives us approximately 10 years to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions to ensure that global warming is kept within a 1.5 degrees Celsius increase. If New Zealand's present actions are anything to go by, and it is after all a minor player, there is little chance of this happening. In the last 5 years alone, there has been little evidence of a reduction, for there has, despite efforts to reduce emissions, there have been desperate efforts to reduce emissions, but these have been wiped out by the massive increase in SUV ownership, and therefore an increase in the use of fossil fuel. In any case, even if efforts were successful, sea level will still continue to rise, as the effects of global warming would still be in progress well towards the end of the century. They can't be stopped overnight. Whether or not, Commissioners, you take any notice of my submission will not ultimately be the deciding factor. You're not actually going to be able to control it. Sea level, it is the natural world that will be the decider. Sea level will continue to rise, whether you like it or not. So in this situation, the frequency of flooding in this particular area should increase. The proposed development will be constantly isolated from the rest of Northland and the country. Therefore, as I have said before, what is the point of permitting this development at this point in time? Why have a town centre that is constantly under threat? Everything I've stated here is not my personal opinion, but has been taken from reported scientific evidence. And I include a list of published material used at the end of this submission. Climate change has to be taken into account. Climate change will not support a viable town centre in the location identified here. Local government really should take notice of the IPCC, and in particular of Sir Peter Gluckman's warning given back in 2013, when he drew attention to the interaction between extreme events, sea level rise, and the location of infrastructure and development near the coast, increasing exposure to risk. He mentions parts of Northland where extensive development has occurred in vulnerable locations. There is little doubt that Ruakaka Marsden Point and the proposed site of this planned town centre fall into this category. Remember the time-honoured saying, when in doubt, don't. And you know, there's a very interesting development happening at the moment. Back in May, I noticed suddenly that sea level, remember, I've been observing sea level for years, and I'm always interested in tidal events because of my sailing experience. I couldn't help but notice that high tide was much higher than predicted for example, a 2.5 tide was now the same as a 2.9 tide. I mean, if you take this amount as identifying the tidal limit, and 2.4 came here, and 2.9 is up here by the dunes, how do you explain that we had a 2.5 tide right up here? If it had been low pressure, yes, that would have elevated, but it wasn't low pressure. If it had been a storm surge, yes, that would have elevated, but that didn't happen. So there was no obvious reason, unless, could it be, sea level was beginning to take effect. Now, the interesting thing is, because I live by this estuary and I see it every day of my life, I can't help but notice that high tide now is lasting for much longer. And this has been going on now solidly for 5 months. Now, the obvious thing is, because we have a tidal gauge at Marsden Point, is actually to have a look at the record there. I realise we only have 5 months, and it's too early to say that this is something actually happening. But I have a suspicion that our sea level is in fact now beginning to show signs of rising, because we are consistently having high tide higher than predicted. And we are not having the weather conditions that would normally explain this phenomenon. So this is why I'm telling you, although the approach roads at the moment to Marsden City appear to be clear, we've already had them flooded in the past. And I'm telling you that because we have the river nearby, and it's a tidal river, and although the maps I showed you did not clearly demonstrate the position of the Taurua stream, I assure you it's right nearby. If you've got these two watercourses causing flooding, it's inevitable that the approaches to Marsden City is going to be regularly cut off. I'm not a fortune teller. I can't tell you when, but it is going to happen. And it looks as if it's starting even now. And that's why I'm saying you have to really seriously consider the practicality of the redevelopment of Marsden City.
Thank you, Mrs. Hicks. That's nice to have you sort of present that to us, because I think you put it so eloquently and and always so easy for us to understand. Commissioner Dimmery, do you have any questions for Mrs. Hicks?
Thank you, Mrs. Hicks. I was interested to know your personal observations about the flooding of the roads. Are you aware of any action that was taken by the regional council or the district council in response to that? Have there been any? Sorry?
What the regional council have done is, earlier this year, they issued a whole set. You should have actually had them, showing there's this here.
Yes.
Unfortunately,
yeah, we've got those in your main
yes,
piece of evidence. Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we have
showing how much flooding is going to take place in the future. And so the regional council are already anticipating this happening.
But to be clear, those maps you've provided, the predictions shown do not cover the site. It does cover the surrounding land and the roads approaching the site, which is your point. Is that correct? Well, so that those maps
all I can tell you is
and the predicted flooding.
The warning has been given, but nothing's been done
Yes.
about it. You're just told that this is what is likely to happen at 10, 50 and 100-year interval. The problem is that these photocopies do not show the definition of the different colours of blue, and so you don't really get a clear picture. You need to actually see it on the screen to actually see clearly. But I can assure you that, I mean, because I live by the river, I actually monitor every single time it floods. So I've been monitoring it for 20 years. And
Yes.
it's quite interesting to notice that my property, which adjoins the river, has been flooded at 10-year intervals. And so I know, you know, from personal experience that this happens. I'm not worried myself because I'm not going to live long enough. I'm going to be dead and gone before anything happens. But I know that my property will end up underwater. It's obvious, it's on floodplain, and I've always known that. But I estimated I'm not going to live forever. And as long as it's okay while I'm alive, that's all that really matters to me personally. But it does affect the future. People will not be able to live there in 20, 30 years' time. But that won't bother me because I won't be here.
I think we have a really clear understanding of your case, Mrs. Hicks. As I said, it was put very eloquently and very easy to follow. And I think the maps that you provided, I can just about make out the colours actually to see the 10 and the 50 and 100, which is good. So yes, no, that's helpful. Thank you for coming along.
Thank you very much indeed.
No. And sorry we're not there with you. Thank you. So next we have WC infrastructure, I think. Is that correct? Do we have Sarah Brownie and Heather Osborne here?
There. Graham Matthias.
Hello. Are you?
Hello.
Yeah. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you, sir.
Yeah. Good. Okay. I can't see you. Should I be seeing you?
No available camera.
Heather Osborne here. Can you hear me?
I've got Heather's just about to appear by the look of it. Who should we have, Heather, for your presentation in terms of who should I be seeing?
We should be seeing Graham Matthias, but unfortunately we're having technical difficulties with his camera. So if you can bear with us.
Yeah, we're getting feedback on your one as well, Heather. I wonder whether the council could just help us. I think we've had some legal submissions come through. Would that email be from Tyler or Ashley? Can someone help?
Yep, I'll take over there. Well, I need a.
Sorry, just double checking that one.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Thank you. Just to make sure I can find the email when it came through, because I know I haven't saved it.
How's that?
Oh, no, I
From
have found
Tyler.
it. Tyler yesterday, was it? Yes.
Good afternoon.
Yeah,
Good
Hi.
afternoon.
Graham
How are you?
Matthias, are you able to see and hear me?
I can see and hear you very clearly. Thank you.
All right. Well,
Thank you.
you've got. I understand you've. Good afternoon. This is. Sorry about the problems with our technology, and I hope you will forgive us for our rather boring presentation, which is to follow, because it's a very hard act to follow, the one that's just been presented. But we'll do our best to keep you entertained and interested for the rest of the afternoon.
Oh, I'm not sure about the whole of the afternoon.
Part of it anyway.
Yes, thank you. So I've got your legal submissions in front of me. I presume Commissioner Dimmery, you've also got those?
Yes. Well,
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, good. So if you could run through those, that would be great. Thank you.
Rightio. Well, as you'll read from my submissions, we we're dealing with just two particular aspects of the plan change. I think I want to make it clear from the outset that the District Council's infrastructure section is not opposing the plan change per se, but it simply has concerns about the proposed provisions in the plan insofar as they deal with wastewater treatment and disposal and reserves. And so I'll deal with each of those in turn. With respect to the wastewater issue, there will be 3 witnesses for the council. There'll be Mr. Campbell, who is a consultant engineer who's been dealing with the difficulties of wastewater treatment and disposal at Ruakaka for some decades. There is Mr. Charles, who's the senior officer of council responsible for this part of its administration. And there's Ms. Osborne, who will give the planning evidence. Now, I recall from yesterday, Ms. Dimmery asking questions of Mr. Allen with respect to the agreement that was reached between the for the council and developers in the Ruakaka area. That was an agreement which was entered into in 2008. And it may be that if you do have some questions about that, Mr. Campbell will be able to assist. And certainly I do have some reasonably good knowledge of it as well. So when we presented our evidence, if you do have any questions about that, Mr. Campbell may be the appropriate person to speak to about it. As I say, he's going to set out an historical record of the development of wastewater treatment and disposal in the Ruakaka Marsden area. And in particular, his Appendix 4 in the supplementary brief or the revised brief of evidence that he circulated, which I think you will have.
We had a number of things come through yesterday, so when Mr. Campbell comes on, we'll make sure we have the right thing in front of us, I think. Yes, and that sets out issues with respect to consented capacity and demand. And his Appendix 3 is in the nature of a graph which displays the issues which confront council with respect to the increasing inflows that it expects to receive against the ability of the treatment plant to treat, but also the availability of disposal facilities within the immediate area, because there are land-based disposal facilities within the area of the existing treatment plant, but also in further parts of the district. But the ability to discharge is going to expire in the not too distant future. And I can recall for you that the council does have a consent permitting an ocean outfall, but that is but the timing of that is yet to be finalised in terms of demand and also the cost, and it's not a finalised budgetary item in council's long-term plan. It's accepted that there is nothing about this plan change which will alter the quality and components of wastewater, make it more difficult to reticulate, and the quantity will not be different from other parts of the district. And those were points that Mr. Allen made to you yesterday, and that's accepted. There's no issue with that. But it's the extent of the development that is possible in this particular area, and the capacity of the plant to treat, and for the areas which are consented for disposal to be able to deal with the effluent if it was approved and allowed and permitted in a very short time. And for that reason, it's submitted that the provisions that the council is proposing through its planning consultant, Ms. Osborne, provide a precautionary approach to control effluent treatment and disposal. As development in this area intensifies, and you may well appreciate that this has the Ruakaka area is something of a roller coaster area for development. It comes and goes like a wave. It's a surge and then it stops, and that's what happened. We
the 2008 agreement was entered into with developers and the council on the expectation that, that there was going to be a tsunami of new consents required in the area. The council didn't have the facilities to treat and dispose. So the agreement was entered into with developers whereby they would help to fund upgrades to the treatment plant and look forward to a future long-term solution. And one of the parties to that agreement was a company called North Holdings Limited, which was the original subdivider of Marsden City. And they were one of the, along with Great Northern Land Company Limited, which I think you're going to hear from later on this afternoon. But those developers, the council said, we can't deal with all your subdivisions that you're after because we don't have the capacity. And so the developers said, well, we'll help you out. And what happened was along came 2008 and everything stopped. And this has been, if you follow the history of Ruakaka, you can go back to the 1970s. It was going to be the next big thing. It stopped. Then there was the refinery upgrade. It was going to be the next big thing, and it stopped. And again in 2008. And it's this problem that for the council in having to deal with the Ruakaka Marsden area as a discrete area for planning for infrastructure, that it is proved to be very difficult to do that on a long-term basis. And it's for those reasons, effectively, that the option 4 as proposed by Ms. Osborne is submitted as being the most appropriate. And the rationale for that is set out in her evidence. And she will be presenting a summary of that shortly, just to go over the main points of her evidence. And with respect, it's my submission that that methodology accords with Objective 6 in the National Policy Statement. This was referred to at paragraph 4.6, pages 8 and 9 of the submissions of Mr. Allen. This was the objective that records for, I'll just turn to it. The particular Objective 6 is that local authority decisions on urban development that affect urban environments are integrated with infrastructure planning and funding decisions, strategic over the mean term and long term, and responsive, particularly in relation to proposals that would supply significant development capacity. And so what the council is looking for is a set of conditions or a set of standards within the rules which would enable the development of this property as a subdivisible area into both commercial, industrial, residential, in conjunction with infrastructural development. So I submit there's a need to link the level of urban development envisaged by this plan change to the ability of the council to provide the required infrastructure. There is an acceptance, as I understand it from the evidence presented by Mr. Badham, that the development of Plan Change 150 needs regulation in terms of wastewater treatment and disposal. And the sole question that I think is in dispute between the council and through its infrastructure section and even the developer or the proponent of Plan Change 150 is how's that best achieved? And the position for the council's infrastructure section is that that's best achieved by particular rules in the plan change itself dealing with this property. The risk of capacity constraints are such that it's argued and submitted on behalf of the council's infrastructure section that the provisions that Ms. Osborne proposes are the most appropriate. Now, Mr. Allen has made a strong argument that it would be inappropriate to differentiate this area from other areas. And he says that in urban planning terms, that would be inappropriate to do. And I accept that in theory, that has an attraction, but the applicant himself through Mr. Allen identifies that when it comes to issues such as vibration and noise, it envisages different rules for this area than might exist in other parts of the district. It accepts through those very provisions that there will of need be in some cases, it may be appropriate to have differing rules for differing circumstances from those which apply across the district. Particular subdivisions or developments may require there to be different rules from those which would apply to the district generally. Fundamentally, the proposition that planning provisions should be uniform across the district has some attraction, but that needs to be considered in the nature of this plan change, because the area envisaged by plan change 150 is quite a discrete area. It's effectively a triangle cut off by quite busy roads, state highway in one case, on two sides of the triangle, with the northern boundary a rail link. And this is also going to be relevant in terms of the open space parts of the plan which you're going to consider. So it's a very large area looking to be redesigned in terms of how it will eventually be developed. And as such, it's divorced not only from the Whangarei urban area, but it's also divorced from the Marsden Bay Ruakaka area. So from a planning perspective, there is nothing in my submission which would weigh against having separate rules applicable to this area, which are different from those in other parts of the district. This is such a separate area, it stands alone from even the area within which it is being considered primarily, which is the Ruakaka Marsden area. It's quite a separate component of that total area, and certainly so far removed from Whangarei that there's no particular reason why the rules which would apply across the district generally should also apply in this area. And indeed, I think as Ms. Shaw pointed out to you yesterday, there are already areas within this vicinity which have particular rules for particular aspects of their use, such as I understand it, even for effluent treatment. I think there was, she pointed to some cases. Where have I got her submissions here? Yes, at paragraph 22 of her submissions, she pointed to the customised provisions with respect to wastewater for a number of appellants within the Marsden Ruakaka area. So those are my submissions with respect to wastewater. With respect to the open space zoning, from the outset, it's my submission that the evidence of Ms. Rawson as an expert in this area should be given special weight, because she is an expert, and I don't understand Mr. Badham to be given evidence as an expert in reserves and lands and open space planning, although he is of course a planner, and I accept that that does give him some qualifications in that area. What Ms. Rawson says though is that this is an area which has special characteristics, and its development needs to be considered on that basis, that it is quite a discrete, separate area, not physically, if you like, connected to the balance of the Ruakaka Marsden Point area. As is pointed out, it is at the moment relatively undeveloped. It does not have existing links to other developed areas of Ruakaka and Marsden. So it's not an area which you could say it's already got an established network of reserves which people who move or develop properties within this area can link into. Because of the very busy roads which separate it, then the future rail link, you have a particular area which doesn't easily conform into or fit into the overall area. So that whereas in the normal course, if you had a subdivision, a new subdivision, a green fields area, which was immediately adjacent to an existing development, you could say, yes, well, we can treat the existing reserves within that existing developed area as being available or open for use by the people who go to reside in the Greenfields development. But in this case, that's not necessarily going to be available, because it's not going to be easy for, say, children on bicycles or mothers with prams to move from PC 150 land to other parts of the area which have developed reserves. It's going to be very difficult for them to move. So that, again, it's submitted that a discrete section of rules applicable to open space is appropriate for this area. And as Ms. Brownie and Ms. Rawson identify, this is a unique development in that sense, and it necessitates a more nuanced approach to the provision of reserves than is considered by Mr. Badham, which is just to apply the standard provisions in the plan. And it's what is proposed as a identification of where reserves in the general vicinity can go, so that people moving into that area and doing developments can have an idea as to what would be expected of them to provide reserves. Thank you. Those are my submissions. Now, as I say, we have the evidence on wastewater, which will be from Mr. Campbell, Mr. Charles and Ms. Osborne, and the evidence on the reserves will come from Ms. Rawson and Ms. Brownie.
Okay, I think we may have some questions for you, but do you have any questions on the legal submissions, Commissioner Dimery?
Thank you, Mr. Matthias. I just have one question, which is, you've referred that we could take the opportunity to discuss with Mr. Campbell the background of the 2008 agreement. What is the legal basis that enabled that agreement to be reached? Is it something in the Local Government Act, or is there anything you can point me to that could require that to be entered into, or was it just a matter of discussions prior to the previous plan change?
Well, under the, I can't remember the relevant part of the Local Government Act, but round about section 200, there are provisions for private developer agreements to be entered into with respect to provision of infrastructure. At the time that the council had this arrangement, it had a financial contributions policy in its district plan, and was at that stage, if I recollect correctly, proposing development contributions in terms of the provisions in the Local Government Act. But the agreement itself was probably more of simply a fundamental contract between developers and the council to enable development to happen. So it was not so much as following a particular path in terms of the Local Government Act, but a case of the council and the developers coming to council and saying, we are prepared to do this so that we can get our developments progressed through. So we're prepared to enter into a contract with you that we will pay so much money towards upgrading the wastewater treatment plant, to provide new reticulation. There was to provide a whole new reticulated wastewater network from the Marsden Cove area through to the treatment plant, and to provide money towards a long-term solution. And they were prepared to enter into financial bonds with their trading banks so that the council could call on that money on demand if it was required to do so. So it was, I think, just a straight out matter of contract where these developers said, well, we want this development to go ahead. We're ready to go. We're prepared to fund council to do it. And that was the basic premise behind it.
Thank you. No, that's all from me. Thank you.
Yeah.
There was one question from me in relation to your paragraph 10, where you were speaking, you referenced the legal advice we had yesterday from Ms. Shaw.
Sure, yes.
There was that was sort of slightly nuanced in a way, in so much as she provided, as you'll know, in her paragraph 22, the table of the various precincts, I suppose, and land where there had been, wastewater, sorry, appeals that have been settled, and whether or not specific wastewater provisions had been included in those. And in her paragraph 23, she says in each of the 3 appeals resulting from upzoning from RPZ to an urban zone, there was specific precinct provisions put in place. But of course, what that doesn't say is in the areas where there wasn't an upzoning from rural, where there was an upzoning from an existing urban zoning, there weren't provisions put in place, which is the other side of that discussion, I guess. We're clearly in that latter group with this plan change. We've got a pattern in what's happened so far, but does that mean anything for us from your perspective?
In my submission, it doesn't, because as I understood Mr. Allen's argument was that it would be inappropriate to have it because it would open up challenges to zonings in other areas, because you could point to particular rules in one area which didn't apply in another. And as I understood his argument, it wasn't about whether it was a particular zoning that was being developed. His argument was that it would be inappropriate because it would create some points of difference which would make it easier for someone to challenge zoning provisions in other environments. In my submission, it matters not whether it's a change from a rural protection zone to a residential type zone, or from or a change from what we have here, an existing zoning, into I'd say a more urbanized area. Yes. I don't think it matters not. I think there's no particular reason at law or in planning why you would not have particular provisions with respect to particular activities or functions between zones. The question is whether it's appropriate to do it, not whether you can do it.
Okay, thank you for that. So we have Mr. Campbell first. I think that's right, isn't it? Yep. So if we run through wastewater and see how we're getting for time, because what I've been doing is recognising we're online. I've been trying to organise breaks about every hour and a half. We've been going since 1:15, so in theory we should be having a break at 2:45, but I think we ought to try and get through wastewater, whatever, and may take a break after that before we move on to open space. But let's see how we go for timing. Right.
Yeah. Well, our first witness will be Mr. Campbell.
Yeah, Mr. Campbell, thank you. We got various bits of paper from you. I think we had some updated evidence yesterday, so it would be good if you could make sure that we know which piece we're meant to be looking at the moment, if that's okay.
Good afternoon. With the revised evidence that you should be dated the 21st of October.
Okay, now I've done this, I'm not even sure that I've saved. We had some evidence through yesterday, didn't we?
Yeah, on the front, the first page, it should have the date.
Okay, let's have a look. Aha, hold on. So it should be 21st, should it? I think I've just opened up the wrong
Correct.
one. Ah, no, here we go. Yeah, sorry.
And there should
Yes.
also have been a 1-page or 2-page document that set out the key changes from the earlier August evidence. And it referred to the key changes by clause.
Okay. Do you know what the file name of that was? I guess you probably haven't got that there, have you?
No. But the front page was called Key Changes to 10 August Statement of Evidence.
Okay, just bear with me. I may have to go back to the email to make sure I get that. So could you just bear with me whilst I do that, just to make sure I've got it. I've got a Word document that is changed. It's got some track changes on it. That wasn't the one that showed the key changes.
No.
No, I think I've got it. Yeah, sorry, bear with me. For some reason, when I downloaded these, I did it in the middle of the hearing yesterday, and one of them didn't save, and I think it's this one. I've got it now. So I've got statement of evidence dated the 10th of August, and then I've got key changes to 10th of August evidence as well. That's also dated the 21st.
Okay.
Commissioner Dimmery, do you have both of those? Okay.
I do, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that. As I said, there was an issue when I saved some things yesterday for some reason. Yep. Yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. So we have a short PowerPoint presentation which will essentially just the key points in the evidence. But just before we do that, the reason why I made the changes to the August evidence was just updating some figures that had been more recently available, both on flows to the treatment plant and on the council's growth projections. But the result of those changes doesn't change in any way my conclusions or findings. So if we can just go to the next slide. There we are. So really what I wanted to get across was to provide some background to the existing wastewater and treatment system that's in place servicing the land in the Ruakaka One Tree Point area. So currently there are the capacity of the current treatment and disposal system is around 1,700 cubic meters per day. As I've noted in my evidence and Mr. Charles's evidence, council has been granted a suite of consents that provide for treatment and disposal for the long term of up to 16,000 cubic meters per day. But I was advised that this does require a new treatment plant and a effective in ocean outfall. So based on current flows and future projections, it is anticipated that the existing disposal capacity would be fully used in the next 3 to 6 years. Now, that is obviously dependent on the rate of growth and the continuing rate of growth in the area. Currently consented developments are expected to use all of that disposal capacity and potentially require further disposal capacity. And council has provisions for constructing further wastewater capacity in its 2021 to 31 LTP and the associated 30-year infrastructure strategy. This oblique photo just gives you an indication or an idea what the existing treatment facilities are. So there's these are right on the coast. There are 2 treatment ponds, there's associated wetlands, and then there's 2 areas for land disposal. One is called Zone 3, which is the one immediately adjacent and on the coastal side of the ponds and the wetlands, and the other one is an area of land of some 20 hectares that the council owns closer to the refinery, and that is again 2 areas for land disposal. This next slide just shows you the extent of the existing developments in the Ruakaka One Tree Point area, and the particular piece of land that is the focus of the hearing are the 2 pieces of land that you will see in that roughly triangular shape in the middle of the slide. And the next slide here is an indication based on a couple of scenarios of when growth is likely to occur, based on slightly different assumptions, slightly different growth rates. There's a red line that runs across horizontally at around, you'll see it intersects with the vertical axis at around 1700 cubic meters per day. And that's, as I earlier noted, is indicating the capacity of the existing treatment and disposal facility. Now, depending on the actual rate of growth and the inflows to the treatment plant, you'll see that there are vertical lines coming down to the horizontal axis, which depicts the various years, and you'll see that depending on which rate of growth occurs and whether we have any significant industrial commercial growth in the area, the capacity will be reached between 2024 and 2029. So in essence, there isn't a lot of spare capacity, and there will clearly need to be some action by council to respond to the projected growth in the next 3 to 5 years. And clearly there'll be work required prior to any of those triggers being reached to ensure that capacity is able to be provided if it is to match development. And this slide is, if we just look at first of all on the first bar on the left-hand side, and this is an indication of the number of household unit equivalents, which is HUE, that have been consented. So there's a total of 5,078 that have been consented, of which approximately 3,600 are actually connected currently to the Ruakaka wastewater scheme. The balance of approximately 1,500 have yet to be connected, but they are currently, a number of those are currently being developed at the moment. Houses and subsequently houses will be constructed on that land. Now, if we move to the right-hand side, you'll see the purple line, which purple bar, which comes back to indicating the current consented disposal capacity, which is around 1,690 or approximately 1,700 cubic meters per day. Now, the 2 middle bars are showing the expected demand based on 2 different demands per, or wastewater discharges per household equivalent. And the reason why I've given 2 is just to reflect, one is the design, which is the 0.5 cubic meters per household. And that's the design figure that council uses. But due to a range of circumstances, which I've outlined in the evidence, currently the actual discharge per household is slightly less. So based on the current demand from, or the current discharges from households, it's anticipated that the capacity of the treatment plant will be reached when the currently consented properties are fully taken up. So that's the 5,078 HUIs. If we are working on a higher flow per property, then it is expected that the currently consented properties may well exceed the current capacity. So the next part is the next point on the graph are the two green bars, and that's a reflection of the additional demand that the PC 150 developments would place on a wastewater treatment system, and you'll see a quite significant extra demand. So it's approximately 50% more than the current consented demand. Now, I should point out that within the blue bars on that does encompass some of the currently consented land of the PC 150 properties, because they do have consents, and as you're no doubt aware, there are currently developments underway there, and there is provision for further developments of that land that is currently being consented as part of the wastewater scheme.
Could I just ask a question whilst we're on that? I thought I understood the graph, but I'm slightly confused by the size of the green piece on the central column versus the right-hand column. Why is the central column larger, the green on the central larger than the green on the, not right, the two columns that have got green on, sorry. The left hand of those is 1656, the right hand is 1615. Why would that, why is...
Okay, so what I might do, if just to answer your question, is to go back to the agreement that was referred to earlier. What was referred to as the BBLOA agreement. That agreement provided for capacity for the land associated with PC 150, but it only provided a small portion of the total demand ultimately that would be brought about by PC 150. So, for example, of the based on the information from Maven, there is approximately 1,675 cubic meters per day demanded from the expected developments that would be permitted by PC 150. So what I've done is I've made an allowance for the 244 HUIs that were that PC 150 provides for under the existing provisions. So the point really is that whilst the land associated with PC 150 was an approved development, there was never capacity provided for the full development. Only a small portion of it was ever consented, and the balance of the development was always going to be subject to the long-term solution being provided. And the long-term solution in this particular instance is a new wastewater treatment plant and the ocean outfall. So unlike the other developments that have taken place in this area, the other residential developments in this area, their capacity has been fully provided for in the consented capacity. The PC 150 have only a small portion of the capacity. So the reason why those bars are different, the 1656 versus 1650, is allocating the 244 HUIs that have been permitted, consented, and applying either the 0.5 cubic meters per day per HUI or the 0.33 cubic meters per day per HUI. So it's just basically allowing for that, and you'll get and one will be a lower figure because at the 0.33 cubic meters per day per HUI, the same amount of Hueys, which would actually demand less flow.
But that one's the 0.33 is the bigger number.
It's 0.3. Yeah, yes, that's right. Because if you take out because what I've done is relied upon the flows that Maven provided as being the expected demand with the new development, and I haven't adjusted that for whether it was. I've relied upon their expertise in assessing what their flows would be. But if I take out the 244 that's already been allocated in terms of the demand,
yes, I see.
You get a smaller figure.
244 at 0.33 on the middle one and 244 at 0.5 on the other one.
Correct.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I saw it and couldn't understand it, but now I fully understand. Thank you.
So that's the extent of what I was I'm presenting. I'm open to any questions.
Commissioner Dimery, did you have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. I just want to check. Sorry, all of the documents, when I open them, they come up as Heather Osborne. I can't tell which one I've got open.
Unfortunately, I have a
right,
a technology problem that I haven't quite solved.
So in your updated 21 October statement, I just want to clarify at your 5.4, there's a bit of, I think I know what you mean. It's got there's some untracked change left in there. So
yes,
I think from the presentation you've just given, it's 3 to 6 years, not 35 to
correct
8 years, or yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to check whether I'd added some notes alongside. Sorry, Commissioner Dimery.
Yeah. So and clarifying that, so at the earliest, the capacity could be reached in 3 years, and I understand from the requester's evidence that there's no dispute that there is a capacity issue. One of the questions I asked Mr. Bellingham yesterday was, you have the consents in place, but how long could it be anticipated that the detailed design and construction would take to bring this capacity online? What's the lead time?
Okay, so I think that's a question that Mr. Charles can probably more appropriately respond to. I mean, it's not my responsibility, but Mr. Charles is the Waste and Drainage Manager of the Council and may well be able to provide a more accurate assessment of that than I might be able to.
Okay. Is he with us now, or?
Yes, he will. If I could make one final comment in relation to the question that was put to Ms. Mathias about the agreement. The agreement was an agreement that predated the Local Government Act provisions for development agreements. So it was an agreement between parties, and it had a currency of 10 years, and so in 2028 the agreement was terminated, and agreement was reached between the parties as to the allocation of capacity in the current system and in any future systems. So the parties came to an agreement. There was money transacted, and the agreement has no further force. But it did set the scene for what the capacities were that were available for the partners or the developers within the within a large portion of the Ruakaka One Tree Point area.
So just continuing with that, is there any reason why a new agreement couldn't be entered into now? And has this been attempted?
Okay, so in terms of a new agreement, the main thrust behind, or the main driver for that agreement was that the district council at that stage in 2007, I recall, did not have any provision in their LTP for providing further wastewater treatment and disposal capacity. And the developers, including the two original proponents of the land covered by PC 150, were involved in that agreement, and the intention was that the two parties would work together and co-fund the required works over the next expected over the next 10 years. Now, the pace of development slackened off after the global financial crisis, and what the council has done and subsequently has included provision within their LTP, which Mr. Charles will talk about, that makes provision for upgrading work and a new wastewater treatment plant and the ocean outfall. So in essence, there isn't a specific need for a similar sort of agreement, and if there was any such agreement, would more than likely be a development agreement under the Local Government Act, where there is now provision for such an agreement. But I think the key message is that the LTP and the infrastructure strategy do provide for capacity to be constructed. The other thing I should also note is that in 2008, when this development agreement was put together, council did not have resource consents for either the short-term or the long-term provision of wastewater treatment and disposal, which they do have, and they were granted in 2011-12.
Thank you. So it really is a timing issue.
Yes.
Is that boiling it down?
Yes.
The money's there, and it's a timing issue.
Correct. And as you will hear from Mr. Charles, the timing is very much intended to be in response to the development rate, and the way that the provision of wastewater has been planned for this area in the Ruakaka wastewater strategy. Unfortunately, it hasn't been able to be done in a sequential way. There's a very large quantum jump from the current types of treatment process, the current types of disposal, to what is seen as a long-term solution. So you're going from capacity at the moment in and around 1,800 to 2,000 cubic meters a day to an outfall capacity which is 10 times that amount. The treatment plant can be built in stages, but the disposal by way of the ocean outfall cannot be built in stages.
So, I mean, it seems from what you're saying that it's a very real and present likelihood that the capacity is going to be met quite soon. So I am interested to know the timing and why perhaps this hasn't progressed, because it is a difficult proposition to build something and then not be able to connect it, and it does seem that you're rapidly approaching that.
That's correct.
The capacity limit.
The timing is very, as I've said, is very much dependent upon the actual rate of growth, and the rate of growth has been around 5 to 7%, depending on which determinant you look at. But there is also provision in there for some industrial development, which has been added almost as a safety factor, because at the moment there's very little industrial development in the area, and I think it's evidenced by PC 150 moving more towards the residential and commercial. It may well be that my conservative figures of 3 years is just that. It's a conservative figure. But if I could suggest that Mr. Charles will be able to provide some more information on timing and the flexibility of timing.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell.
Did you have any other questions for Mr. Campbell, Commissioner Dimery?
No,
No, thank you. Thank you,
no, thank you.
Campbell. I think I'm clear. I don't really want to do this in many ways, but I am actually going to adjourn for 15 minutes because I think we've been going since 1:15, and I think we probably need a 15-minute break. So I know we're sort of in the middle of your thing, but we're in between two people as well, and I think we're going to get quite late otherwise. So sorry, Mr. Charles, but I think I'm going to adjourn until 3:15. So we can all just grab a cup of tea and things, and then press on for the afternoon. So see everyone in 15 minutes. Thank you.